All right. Here with Dr. Douglas W. Johnson today. We met on a tennis court not too long ago. And through our conversations, I learned that you were at least a doctor, pilot, and painter. And I've looked at your website, dwjohnsonfinearts.com, which will also be in the show notes. And also, my wife and I went to St. Augustine a few weeks ago and saw your picture. I think it was Reflection or Reflections in an art show down there.
Oh, very good.
Thank you for being here today. And what takes up most of your time these days?
Well, the time is split between family and art, but the art seems to be taking over in it's my more or less third career, but I'm out there at all hours of the day, kind of get lost in the art studio. Was out there at 4:30 this morning working on another painting for a show coming up in St. Augustine next month.
Is that show in St. Augustine one that happens at that place every so often, or is it a different one?
Yeah. The St. Augustine Art Association is one of the most active art associations in Northeast Florida. It's a great venue, and they change out shows every month. I've been a member there for several years. And usually during the art walk, which in St. Augustine is the first Friday of every month, they will have a new show premiere. And that will be up for about 4 weeks. And it's a great way to see a lot of regional artists in the area. And the prices there are about 1/2 to 1/3 of what you'd find in a retail gallery. So if people are looking to add any artwork, that's a good place to do it. And there's some pretty well-known folks in there, and it's a lot of fun. They have all venues, all types of art. I think last month, before the one that you saw, the month before that, they had a whole bunch of tactile art, which I'd not really heard of, but it's basically fiber art and woven materials, that kind of thing. But then they'll have ceramics, they'll have sculptural art one month, they'll have different shows with different themes, and then they'll even twice a year they'll have what they call the honors show, which is people that have won awards within the last 2 years are eligible to put in additional artwork for a show, basically of all winners. Not artwork they won for, but more artwork by those same artists. So it's a really interesting group of individuals. They must have 300 or 400 artists in the area from Orlando north.
Wow. How many art shows do you do locally then, like regularly?
Well, locally meaning South Georgia and Northern Florida. I think since January of this year, I've been in close to 30. So somewhere between 25 and 30. It's I have to keep a spreadsheet to see which art is where and what shows, when it went in, when it came out, when I'm supposed to pick it up, which is the most important thing. And keep track when the paintings sell. You got to keep track of all that for the tax man. So,
is it a thing that you're doing all that stuff yourself then, keeping track of everything? And
I am right now. I was kind of a troglodyte when it came to the art world. I started my art. We can get into that later if you like, but it's over 50 years ago. I started painting, but had no inclination to paint for anybody else. I was painting for myself for a variety of reasons. And then in the last several years, I've gotten to be a little bit better known in the area, and basically got shamed into getting up a website. So I now have a website, so I spend time keeping that up to speed. And that is what I think you mentioned there, dwjohnsonfineart.com. Not a very creative name, but it kind of describes everything. But that's good. And that allows me to keep inventories of the paintings and what's where. And I try to keep that up to speed. I just got notified again this morning that a painting I put in an international landscape competition by a company out in California. They just told me that I won a small award with that, which it's, every once in a while, you get a little bone, and that's nice to to add to the awards section of the website.
What kind of place do you do most of your work? Do you go to a location, or do you have your studio that you do most of your work in?
That's a very good question, and that's actually changed over the years. I mean, this started off with me painting on my kitchen table, and that has some obvious issues if you're doing oil painting with the odors and smells and all that. And then that kind of ground to a halt when we had young children. And then finally, I started getting serious about pursuing this as a post-medical career, probably about 2007, something like that. And we ended up building a dedicated art studio out behind my house. So in fact, I built that to be half an art studio and half an air-conditioned garage. Well, now the car that was in there has been sold, and now the art stuff has completely taken over the entire building.
That's how that works.
Yeah, exactly.
That's nice to be able to have a place you can go to at all hours and do what you want to do.
It's a lot of fun. You interview a lot of creative people, and you kind of get in the zone, and time just stops. That's what I found anyway. When I go out there, I turn on some type of music, whatever I'm in the mood for that day, and I'm still using what my wife not so affectionately calls my guy speakers. You know, those things you got in college or shortly after college that are about the size of a Mack truck. And
nice.
She decided they weren't eligible to stay in the main house anymore. But I still got my old stereo system and those speakers, so I hooked those up, and I go out there, and I swear I've been out there for 30 minutes, and it turns out to be like 6 hours.
Yeah, that's nice when you get into that zone and you just step back later and go, wow. Does your stereo have an 8-track player on it?
Not that bad, no.
Oh, okay. Because I have a stereo with 8-track player.
Yeah, my first car, I had a 1971 Ford Pinto, and the highlight of it was the 8-track tape player in
it. It's one of those things where it's quite frustrating trying to listen to an 8-track now if you're not in for all the music that's on there. Like if you put in Blood, Sweat, and Tears and you're going to listen to the whole thing, it's fine. But if you're trying to find a specific song, that's going to be frustrating.
Awesome. Do you have one of those?
Yep. Still works.
Really? And can you still get tapes? I mean, I thought the tapes degraded over the years.
The tapes still work. I have Blood, Sweat, and Tear, Best of Bread, and a couple other older ones like that. That's what I got when I was a kid. Yeah. And I've gotten rid of a lot of the albums and used to have a whole lot of CDs. But then once I started seeing that you could put it on the computer, so I downloaded a bunch on the computer, and then now it's iTunes and all the other stuff where I still buy the music if I like it. I don't just listen to it for free. I don't know how much money makes it back to the artist, but I still try to do that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Blood, Sweat, and Tears. That was the favorite 8-track tape I had in there. And nice. It was, I was a senior in high school in Southern California up on the high desert. And I still remember at night, after taking a date back home, I'd be driving back across the desert to where we lived, and the windows down and the 8-track up and BST playing full bore. And it was magical with all the stars out. And it was, I still remember the smells and the sound of that every night.
Yeah. It's interesting how much you can listen to one song and you can think of, you have those memories associated with it. But if you hear 2 or 3 songs in a certain order that you heard back then, or you find an old mixtape you made, then that takes you right back to that point. It's pretty interesting how the mind works.
Especially BST. I mean, they had such great musicians on board. I think they were pretty formally trained, a lot of them too. There were some really good people in there.
Yeah, there's some shows that have a lot of the like documentaries or rockumentaries, if you want to call it that, about different artists that I wasn't really fans of growing up, but then you watch that and you see their passion for music and you're like, wow, I thought they were just out there doing whatever. There's a Keith Richards one, and I can appreciate the Rolling Stones. I didn't own any Rolling Stone albums when I was younger, but just his look at music and the detail of it, and it's just pretty great. It's pretty great to hear somebody that really does something they enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. It's speaking of musicians, I know this is kind of a tangent, but the have you seen this documentary called The Wrecking Crew? It's on, I think you can get it on Netflix or maybe even on YouTube now. I'm not sure, but it's called The Wrecking Crew, and it's about a series of studio musicians in Los Angeles back in the 60s to mid 70s. And these people were expert musicians at whatever instrument they played. And they were so good that the recording studios had them come in to fill in. Like if a guitarist didn't show up for one of the major bands coming in, they'd have this guy come and do it. And then they got a whole team of these people. And then as a lot of the artists started hearing the quality and the level of musicianship of these people, they insisted that they play on their albums. And you never hear about these people because they were not listed on the albums. They were paid a daily rate. And in return for that, they agreed not to have their name on the albums. But this documentary talks about these people, and they ended up playing for, I mean, you would be astounded at the albums you and I recognize that are basically being played by the Wrecking Crew. And I won't give away any more than that, but it's well worth a watch. It's astounding. And these people, even decades later, are still talked about in the genre. I mean, they did all the music for Sonny and Cher and the Monkees, all those things, but weren't the original members playing the music. They may sing the songs, but all the music was done. And those, talk about creative people, they were making up the whole riffs for all types of things. The James Bond riffs, all that was from the Wrecking Crew. But anyway, take a look at that.
All right, I will check that out. There's two shows on Netflix. I think they're both on Netflix. They're either on Netflix or Prime. And one of them is Song Exploder. There's also a podcast about that covers a lot more music, but Song Exploder, if you want to watch it and listen to it, I think it has a couple seasons on there. That is really great because I've looked at it and I see songs that I don't know or that I didn't think I liked. And then I watch the process of how they go about making it and all those extra layers of it. It's pretty amazing. And then there's another one on Netflix called Abstract. And I'm not sure how many seasons of that there are, but they have architects and car designers, painters, all kinds of different people that talk about art in their field. And that's pretty amazing too. I didn't know it was, I mean, it makes sense, but I didn't know it was so much detail. And just one about Legos and things like that. It's pretty great. Pretty great.
Yeah, it is amazing. Just as you mentioned with the music, how sometimes you don't really appreciate the song, but when you hear the backstory, all of a sudden it makes sense. I find the same thing in the art world. There's, especially the more modern art and what have you. I mean, you just look at it and you think, well, it's a circle on a square. What does that have to do? But if you actually talk to the artists about their thought process that went into it, it gives you a whole new awareness and appreciation. At least it does for me. And even going back to the old masters, I when I go to a museum overseas or something, I'll pay to have somebody give me a tour and talk about 5 or 10 paintings, and just hearing about a painting in depth for about 5 or 6 minutes. That's something you'll never forget.
Yeah. Went to that Picasso exhibit that was downtown Jacksonville a couple months ago, where it just has the video of them. It was not what I expected it to be. And I think I'd rather go to a museum and pay somebody to talk to me about 5 paintings than go to a place that just showed video of it. Maybe there's a deeper meaning to be had in that, but that felt more like just a cash grab on Picasso. But,
yeah. Well, no comment.
Yeah. With your studio, how do you have that set up then? Do you have it to where you can have your work there and then you can just come right in and get to it? Or do you have different projects in different states of being done?
Well, kind of all of the above. I It's basically not that big a room. The dedicated studio portion of it is probably about 10 by 12 feet, something like that. But it has a sink so I can clean up stuff there. It has a restroom attached to it, which with my age is a good thing to have. Um, when I built it, I designed it so it has northern light through the windows, which is kind of a neutral, cool light.
Nice.
If you read about a lot of people setting up their studios back in the 1800s and before, they always liked the north light because it was not changing that much during the day. To further echo that, I put in overhead ceiling lighting, hand lighting, but I have all daylight bulbs in there. So it's that was kind of state of the art when I built it in 2006. If I were going to do it again, you can now get these panels of lights that you can select remotely, whether you want a daylight, incandescent light, fluorescent light. So if you're painting something like a commission, you're painting for somebody that you know is going to be in a certain setting, an office versus a home, a bright room versus a dark room, you can set up the lighting in your studio to match where the painting is going to be, which helps you adjust the values and the brightness and what have you to help show it off the best wherever it's going to end up. So I have all that, and I've got I've got 3 easels. I'm usually working on 3 or 4 things at once, and I found to back up, when I first started, I started in oil paints, but then I had to give that up due to those things I mentioned, the kids and the fumes and all that. So I switched to acrylics, which is easy to clean up, and you can clean off the table and have dinner and then put it back out again. But the acrylics dry so fast, and I always had trouble mixing acrylics. I could never really get good mixtures of colors. So since I built the studio, I've gone back to oils. So after a 30-year hiatus, I've gone back to oils now, and I like them. They take a while to set up, so you can paint on it today. I'll probably be out there painting at 10 o'clock tonight, and I go to bed, and tomorrow morning go back out and still work with the paints, still blend them, and it's still it helps me, especially if you do landscapes. Landscapes, depending on what you do, a lot of landscapes involves the sky, and the sky is actually a very nuanced structure. It's not a lot of hard-edged things. There's a lot of softness, and I like that with oils because they kind of over time they slowly merge together, and you can get a softer edge. So but to do that, you need to have a place where you can leave it all out there. I'll clean the palette every night, but I've got these paintings going, and while I've got one color batch mixed, I'll go around and work on different paintings that I'm going to be using that color in, so I don't waste a lot.
Yeah, I've heard of people putting their palette just in the refrigerator and then come back out and use it again. I'm not sure how well that works.
Well, I think that will work if you're going to be several days without using it. That's not an issue for me. I'm going to put it out there. I'm out there. I'd say I'm painting probably 4 or 5 days a week, so it never gets a chance to really harden up. I just keep putting more and more paint down, and that tends to work.
Is that the main medium you use now? Is oils, or do you do other things as well?
That's the main thing I did. I've dabbled a little bit in watercolors. I'd never actually done watercolor before, but there's a very well-known female watercolorist by the name of Mary White, Whyte, and Mary, for whatever reason, really likes veterans. So she went around. She did this project a few years back that she went around without telling anybody what she's doing. She visited all 50 states, and in each state she found a veteran who may have been a veteran, not now, but in World War II or Vietnam or something like that. And she painted them in their current daily life. And these are not small watercolors. Some of these watercolors are like 6 feet tall. Well, these are so exquisitely done that they've been on display at the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico. They've been at the National, I believe it's the National Gallery of Art in DC, and they've been going around to different museums around the country. Well, anyway, flash forward, she really likes veterans, so she put out this blurb about 6 months ago saying she was going to hold a watercolor boot camp for veterans, and it was all online. And if you signed up, she accepted a certain number of students, and I signed up for it. And she tells you what to go get watercolor wise, and I figure, well, what the heck? I've never done watercolors, and she had a series of about 8 different master watercolorists that painted different ways. One guy was an abstract painter, one guy did landscapes, one lady did floral arrangements, you name it. There's all different things, and they showed you the techniques, how to do it, what have you. It is watercolor. I'm glad I tried it. I did 4 watercolor paintings. I'm not sure it's something I'm going to stick with. The advantage of watercolors, if you do a lot of traveling, you don't have to worry about taking anything to TSA. It's all basically vegetable based and with water, so it's easy to take with you. But it's completely the opposite of oil painting. Oil painting, you basically lay down your dark colors and tie in all your darkest values. That's the first thing you do, and you do that very thinly. And then as you build the painting out, adding different lighter colors and different intensities of colors, it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. Well, watercolor is just the opposite. You start off with what you want to be the brightest, i.e. no color at all, or what you want to stay white. And you have to be thinking about keeping that area pristine and not letting anything get on it. And then you gradually build out. So the very last thing you put on is the darks. And that is something that I suppose if I did it more, I'd get my head around it, but I don't have the patience to sit there and wait for it to dry and then come back and do it again, kind of thing, time after time after time. So I did that for a while. I did explore, of all things, house latex paint. I was at a modern museum of art in Dallas, and I saw a bunch of Jackson Pollock paintings. He's a famous painter back mid-century, last century, and he kind of interesting duck. A lot of documentaries about him. Kind of a tragic life, but he would paint these huge things on the floor. I mean, like 20 feet by 15 feet. And you probably remember from the splatter painter, he'd just take buckets of things and throw them on there and do this, that, and everything. So I said, well, I was actually intrigued with how he did that. And I tried to read up on him, and he used house paint. So I went down to our local hardware store, got some house paint and got some canvases. And I thought about what I wanted to paint. And I ended up painting 3. I started with 1. Before I was done, I knew I wanted to paint 2 others along with it. Ended up with what they call a triptych. So 3 paintings, all painted with different layers of house latex. And I thought it was very, not only satisfying, but it was very complex. I mean, on the one hand, you look at it, it looks like somebody threw paint on it. But on the other hand, I spent as much time planning out where I was going to put that stuff down as I did on any landscape or figure painting or anything like that. So did a lot of work with them, and they're still hanging in my house. I've never even put those up for sale. In fact, my kids are fighting over when I die who's going to get them. But so that was kind of a unique thing. Then I started reading further, and they said that they're having a problem with a lot of Jackson Pollock's paints because house paints do what house paints do. And after about 50, 60 years, some are starting to flake a little bit. So they spend a lot of time trying to conserve them and paint over them. And so I'm not sure they're going to be around a few hundred years from now, but that's not a big point for me anyway. So
can you do prints of those, or?
Yeah, I probably could actually. It's one of those things, there's some depth to it. So it's hard for a print to capture that. Just like a lot of the impressionists, you've probably seen the Starry Nights painting, which is all the Starry Nights. And it's one thing to see it in 2D, but you go to the Met in New York and see it. And it's, when you realize it's like, you look at it sideways, it's like an inch thick. I mean, there's deep craters where all these things are. It's a whole different ballpark. But yeah, that brings up a good point. I did a couple of series of prints early on of some of my paintings. People were asking me to do prints of things, and I did that. But I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I didn't want to just go to some online place and get them done. I went to a professional place in town here in Jacksonville and had some prints done, which were not cheap. I mean, my cost for a small print, like 12 by 24, say something like that, was probably about $150 just to do the print. And then,
Goodness.
so then you try to, you, you have to sell a bunch of those to make it worth your while because there's a whole setup fee. So if you sell 1,000 of them, it's pretty cheap. But if you're making, 5 of them or 10 of them, it's not very cost efficient. So I've not
Yeah,
really
it's like
thing.
silk screening T-shirts.
Yeah, exactly. It's all in the setup, right? Or embroidery on logos.
Yeah.
The same thing.
Have you thought about doing pictures of them, like a nice photography of your picture, and then you can do it with a light going across it while you're taking a picture? You can get the depth of it, or you do like a video clip of 10 or 15 seconds across it, just like a sunrise,
I
sunset.
actually thought of that, and I thought you have to demonstrate that to me after a tennis court meeting sometime.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
That, or you could do an oil painting of your latex paint, like not use latex, just paint it on oil.
Yeah,
Wouldn't that be
yeah,
something?
yeah. It was such a mess doing it though. The one nice thing about doing house painting, you can clean most of it up. With that said and done, I spent a lot of time trying to clean up the art studio after that. There is still paint on the ceiling and on the walls. I wasn't able to get it from, you try doing this, and you think most of it's going there, but you forget some of it's going behind you too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it makes you think about a crime scene. The
Exactly.
if you're going to oil paint it though, I would use a brush and then just oil paint. Look at your latex paint and then oil
Well,
paint one. And then
I have to show you one of these.
I'm not an artist though, so I don't know how that works.
This would be pretty complex. In fact, one of the 3 of the paintings I did, I've done 6 in that style. 3 of them, the triptych, is going to be entered in a show coming up at the Art Center downtown on Adams Street, and that's going to be the first time they've been seen outside my house in quite some time. But they're called the RETI 3 series, and being a doc, to me, it's my impression of a stroke. The first one it's all very dense neural networks, and then you see everything's kind of black and gray and silver, kind of cool looking, except one little red dot, and that's where the stroke is going to start. And then the next one shows the whole explosion and all the stuffiness and the edema and the blood and the hemorrhage and all that. And then the third one is back to the fine reticular series of nerves over a dark background with a little hole in the middle. That's the residuum of the stroke. So it shows the recovery phase, but not 100% recovery. Anyway, wow. It makes a lot of sense, but there's no way I could paint that with an oil paint. So
let me know when that's going to be shown. I'll go take a look at that.
Yeah, you bet. I'll put it on the, if people sign up for if they go to the website and sign up for the newsletter, I usually will send out blurbs when new shows are starting and any other news that comes out.
Okay. How then, I guess I can see a little bit there, but how does your past work and like your being a pilot and being a doctor figure into painting? I mean, that way is a great example, but how else does it affect it?
Well, I guess you'd have to back up there a little bit, and I think they're all kind of interrelated. You've got to be able to think in all these specialties, whether it's medicine or art or flying. You've got to be able to think in 3 dimensions. Now, not all physicians, but any surgeon or any physician that does surgery, where you're trying to think about how you're trying to get around abnormal things to get to normal things, and what you're going to cut out without harming things in between. Flying, you've got to figure out not only laterally north, south, east, west, where you're going to go, but you got to think vertically. Obviously, you don't want to run into a mountain, but you don't want to end up running out of fuel over water. I mean, there's basic things, and that's very simplistic. There's a lot of complex rules when you fly about what airspace you can go in, what airspace you need to avoid, who you need to be talking to, what weather patterns you're going to be in and around, and how you're going to try to avoid all that. So you got to be creative before you ever get in the airplane, before you ever get in the operating room. You've got to have a game plan on what you're trying to do. And I found that to be the same way with the art process. And so for me, they're all pretty much tied together. You know, I got into artwork, you know, long time ago, not because I was going into artwork, but I had some specific goals. I mean, back in the earliest days when I was, you know, in my teens, I was drawing and sketching. I had great plans of being an aerospace engineer, and I would work up detailed plans for anything from things I had in my head, spaceships and all that kind of stuff, to rockets. I don't know if you ever built model rockets when you were a kid. There's this company, I think it still exists, called Estes Industries, based in Colorado, and they make these, you know, rockets you can shoot up. And, you know, most people buy the kits. Well, they also supplied parts. You could buy parts. So I decided I read through all their technical notes, and basically they had back in the 60s, they had a national rocket design contest. So I got my protractors out and my sketching tools and basically designed a rocket and sent it into Estes, and lo and behold, I won the competition. I was on my 2 minutes of fame back in the 60s as a teenager. I was on a couple different radio shows in San Antonio, Texas, and got published in a national magazine and got a little cash award and what have you. Then I built the rocket, and what I didn't tell us is on the second flight, one of the engines malfunctioned and it went tearing laterally through a forest and set the forest on fire.
Lovely.
But anyway, we don't talk about that part too much. But it was a lot of fun doing that, and that was one of the reasons I had to learn how to draw and kind of translate from my head what I wanted to do. And then it flashed forward to college. You know, like most college students, I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. I was trying to scrape together enough just to pay the tuition and books and fees and all that. But I finally I got off campus in an apartment, and I realized I didn't have anything to hang on the walls. So that wasn't very pleasing. So I went down to the local arts and crafts stores, and they had one of these kits you could get. And, you know, it has a basic set of paints, and it gives a couple canvases in there. And, you know, you could paint 3 paintings with this thing. So I checked a couple books out of the library, tried to read a little bit about all that, and ended up painting a couple paintings of places I had lived. And that is how I started doing this, was to have something to hang on the walls. And then I started thinking, well, what do I want to paint? And for me, I wanted to paint memories, which sounds kind of hokey, but I was a military brat. My dad was in the Air Force for 27 years, so we moved around a bunch. I mean, my 12 years of grade school, I went to 11 different schools around the world. And I always remembered that there was, no matter where we moved, there was one painting. They didn't spend much on artwork, but they had bought this one painting in Spain when we lived over there. And so no matter where we moved, and sometimes we moved in every 6 months, the one constant in our life was that painting hanging in our house or apartment where we were living at the time. So even when my parents passed away, that painting, which was painted in 1960, is still hanging on my wall here in Jacksonville. And to me, that painting represented a foundational rock. So that was one of my first appreciations for paintings. I mean, it wasn't like I'd gone to museums and knew all the masters or anything. It was basically, that was something I could latch onto no matter where I went. So I thought, well, I'd like to kind of do that for the places I've lived, you know, throughout life. So I painted, you know, we were talking about listening to Blood, Sweat, and Tears in the high desert in California when I was in high school. So one of the first two paintings I did was a picture of the sunset on the high desert in Southern California. And then ended up painting pictures of different places we lived. And that was how I first started accumulating a bunch of these things and trying to develop a technique a little bit. Never took any lessons. But then the next thing we started to do is when I got married, we loved to travel. And that was, I don't know about you, but we would always take all these photographs. I mean, way before digital, like taking all these pictures, and you come home and you got 1,000 pictures, 900 of which you have to throw away because they're terrible. The last 100 you try to put in an album, and then you never see them again. And then even the digital, it's almost worse with digital. Now you come home with 3,000 pictures, and they're on a disc somewhere, but you don't really look at them that much. So I decided what we were going to do for our trips is we were going to take the best point of the trip, and I would try to combine it into a picture. So I picked, for instance, I painted a painting of a scene. We were doing a mountain biking trip in southern Utah, Canyonlands National Park. So I've got this scene, and my wife and I are on bicycles, and you can see an eagle over here, and you can see a mesa over there, and you can see a hill here and a certain road. All those things were on the trip, but they weren't all in the same place. So I had to create a picture that made sense to me anyway. So all our trip was distilled into this one painting, and that painting is hanging on the wall. So we have different paintings around the house that depict different trips we've taken. So that's, again, that kind of creative thing. It's not just reproducing the photograph, you're actually taking the best of. But that was all done when I got home. The biggest epiphany for me in recent years has been doing something called plein air painting. So I actually take the easel, go outside, set it up, and I'll go around. And I've been plein air painting. I was just up in upstate New York, plein air painting 3 weeks ago. And, it's somewhat like the Olympics of painting in that, in a studio painting, you can sit down there, you've got photo references, you can look up stuff online. You want to see a picture of a certain kind of tree, you can look it up and incorporate that into your painting. And you have as much time in the world as you need to do that painting. Plein air, on the other hand, you've got to be fast. You basically only have light that's in a decent position to use for painting for about 2 hours at a time. In fact, most of the darks, because the shadows keep moving as the sun moves, you've got to lock in all the darks on your canvas in the first 15 minutes. So it really is, it separates the men and women from the boys and girls being out there doing plein air painting, because you've got to really know your palette. You got to lock it. You got to think of what you're going to paint. You got to lock it down. Get about 90% of it done in a 2 hour time block. And then you can take it home and you can, add a post box or, change the color on a tree or something if you need to, but you need to get most of the painting done. So that has really occupied a lot of my time in the last 5 or 10 years. The other thing I have used the painting for is to highlight the third aspect of my life. We talked about paintings for medical scenes, paintings for nature, which I love, but painting for aviation, because as we were discussing, I'm an aviator, and I like to paint aviation paintings. I think one of my big things is I like to try to paint the beauty of nature alongside something man-made, which in my case, a lot of times has something to do with airplanes.
Yeah, I've read online your story of how you painted the painting that's behind you. That was interesting.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of it, but
yeah, Angels 40 and climbing.
Yeah.
So for your listeners that aren't aware, we talked about college not having two nickels to rub together. Well, when I decided I wanted to go to medical school, I really didn't have two nickels to rub together. But the military had this great program called HPSP, the Health Profession Scholarship Program. So I applied to that, was accepted, and they paid my way through medical school. And then I owed them some time when I got out. Well, I ended up liking it so much between active duty and reserves, I ended up spending 24 years in the Air Force myself. But I got a chance, as one of the things you do many things in the military. But one of the things I became was a flight surgeon. So I had at one time the ability to space being available wherever it was, I could hop in any plane with more than one seat. So I had the pleasure of flying with the Army. Sorry, not with the Army, but with the Air Force and the Navy in, one or two flights in a variety of different aircraft. The one behind me, and you can't see behind my head there too well, but that was actually a picture from a photo reference I took with a camera on my knee. You weren't supposed to take cameras in the planes, but I figured, what the heck, what are they going to do to me? So they couldn't throw me out at the top. So I had this camera, and I kind of just pointed it up, looking through where I was sitting. So that's actually me there, and I was looking at the sky above us. So that was in an F-18 B model out of Cecil Field back in the day when they still had a training squadron here. And we were going down to do a bombing mission over a bombing target area near Ocala. And came back, and I said, well, yeah, that's kind of cool. But again, I don't want that picture just to disappear. I'd like to do a painting of that. And in fact, I decided, you talk about creating things. I said, I'm going to do a series called, The Warriors, or the Air Warriors, or something like that. So I immediately, in my head, I was going to do a modern day picture. I was going to do a painting of an aviator from the World War II era, and then I was going to go back and paint one from the World War I era. So I painted them in reverse. So this is actually the modern one that I did first. And that is actually called Angels 40 and Climbing. And it was in a Navy plane, but I was an Air Force guy. So there's an inside joke as you look at that painting way up above us in the sky there. There's two other small jets. And most people wouldn't realize it, but true fighter guys will say, hey, you said you're in an F-18? I said, yeah. He said, those are F-15s above you. I said, well, I was Air Force. You've got to have the Air Force above the Navy. So that's kind of an inside joke. And there's a lot of inside jokes in a lot of my paintings that may or may never see the light of day. So
when you do works like that, and if you ever sell them or sell prints of them, do you put in an explanation of like a little when you painted it, and kind of like a explanation of that and all the other issues with it?
I have usually done that orally. There's a big controversy over that, actually. As I've gotten more and more into the art world, I meet a lot of professional artists, and people are on the fence about whether you should do that or not. I mean, when I talk to them about that, the concern is that if you explain too much about a painting, then it may lose the meaning it had for the new viewer. And you certainly don't want to ruin that for anybody. So I don't want somebody looking at that and saying, oh, that's Doug Johnson in the F-18. That could be Uncle Charlie flying in an F-14 Tomcat, or that could be, my dad when he was in Vietnam. And I'd rather them have that image. So I usually don't, with a few exceptions, I usually don't write that stuff down. But with that said and done, when somebody comes up and they want to talk about it, they'll ask me what it is. And I said, well, what does it mean to you? Because I'll throw it back at them and I'll get that. And then as we go through the conversation, if it's appropriate and they are insistent to ask about it, then I'll kind of explain where I was coming from on it. But I try to be fairly sensitive to all that.
I like that. It's kind of like songs and poetry and things that are open into interpretation like that.
Right.
That's good.
Right,
like
exactly.
If you're writing a book, especially a nonfiction, it's pretty much spelled out what you mean or what's going on. But if you're doing poetry or music, then it could mean something else to some other people, especially if they get the lyrics wrong and they think it means something else, because it's other words.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, how often does that happen? I mean, I remember some of our old standards. Decades later, I have one of the old original band members on there explaining the lyrics, and you go, "Wait, what?" I had no idea. But
Yeah, that's not the lyrics.
That's
this guy.
not what it meant to me.
Yeah. I never thought about painting like that. I like that. I guess it'd be the same thing with photography too. It's just you're capturing that moment, and it's going to resonate with someone. If it resonates with you, talking about taking 900 pictures and then keeping 100, that's basically what people are doing on Instagram these days when they're looking for the perfect picture of themselves. It's a little different than you're on vacation and you're saying, "No, these are the highlights of it." It is interesting to see people that have an eye for photography and people that do not.
Right.
Like it sounds snotty to say that some people, when they pick up a camera and you go, whoa, what are you taking a picture of? Like maybe every now and then you'll get one that's you could look at and say, well, there's an artistic value to that. And then other times you just go, man, that's just a bad picture. But I mean, you do that with your own pictures too.
And that, and to your point, every once in a while, you'll run across a photographer. There's a nature photographer who lives here in Jacksonville, and her name escapes me, but I've seen some of her work, and it's like every picture she takes is perfect. I mean, it's unbelievable, and it captures emotions, and it's basically knowing when not to take the picture, right? I mean, that's knowing when not to paint something, how to do the composition. I mean, there's a lot of overlap in photography, because photography is yet another type of artwork. But when you're, and I'm trying to get better about this. When I paint something now, a lot of it's about the composition. So you need to what is going to be your focal point? Where are you going to put it in the photo and the painting? You never put it smack dab in the middle. You don't put it off on one edge. There's the rules of thirds, and that's a whole other lecture series there on how to position all these things. But the all that goes into it, and I find that very interesting. As I said, I never took any lessons for the first 40 plus years, and then about 6 years ago, I was going down to something called the Cork Studios here in Jacksonville. It's kind of a funny name. It's an old warehouse district, probably a place you wouldn't want to be in at night, but it's a bunch of artists in there that have their own little galleries, and they once a year will have an open studios where people can walk through and see what they're painting. And there's this one fella that I just loved his stuff. I mean, every painting, and I didn't realize at the time, but he was standing behind me. So I'm talking to my wife, I said, boy, I wish I could paint like that, because I had gotten to the point where I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, I got to a plateau, and I was doing more photorealistic kind of work. But, cameras got so good, I started thinking, well, shoot, if I'm going to paint photorealistically, I just ought to take the picture and print the picture. I don't really need to be painting it. That doesn't involve the creativity where I wanted to go. So anyway, I was telling her that. Well, he pops up behind me. It turns out it's the former chairman of the art department at UNF, who's retired now. He's an emeritus professor, and he will occasionally take students in under his wing. So he and I have been painting on Wednesdays for the last 6 years. I go down to the Cork Studios, and he has taught me so much about all these things you're referring to, about composition and, cool colors, warm colors. And one of the toughest things and the most important things is actually throwing out stuff. There's too much information in a lot of photographs, and, getting rid of this stuff in a painting that you don't really need to make your point. And that has actually been one of my biggest challenges, but I think one of the things I've learned the most about. And we got talking about that one night, and it turns out it basically is more like how we are built. If you see a photograph and just look at the photograph, everything is detailed. You can look at that, but you're never looking at the whole photograph at once. You're picking one point, this point, that point. And the way we work as human beings is we have a very narrow high resolution focal point to look at something. When you're looking at something, be it on the tennis court or, you know, at the baseball game or whatever, you can focus on one thing, but it's only about 10 degrees that you can see clearly. The rest is all a blur. I mean, you could look, you know, just pick something in your room right now and look at it, and you realize that 90% of what you see is a blur around it. So I think really good painters know that, and they will have a focal point, and you won't even realize it, but your eye is guided right to the focal point of the painting without the rest distracting from it or detracting from it. And there's different, I mean, if you're trying to take a 3D thing and convert it to a 2D image, so there's different tricks you have to do. One is basically how sharp the line edge is. You know, that's going to be a focal point, whereas you have to blur some of the other edges. You know, you put, if you want people's attention drawn to something, you do the lightest light against the darkest dark, right where those two meet. That's going to be a focal point. There can be lead-ins to the painting. You can use a stream or a shadow or something to guide the eye into the painting. And then in a really good painting, it goes to the focal point and goes bouncing around to two or three things, ends up back at the focal point. So your eye isn't guided out of the painting. It kind of wanders around. So that's been kind of a fun challenge to do all that. Sorry about that.
All right. That's one of those things where you get in video, they talk about the soap opera effect, where with 4K, everything is so crisp and clear. And then you're looking at something that's not natural for you to look at like that. So having those cameras that blur the area around it or blur the background makes more sense now. That it's more focused. All right.
I've got a grandson with a birthday today, and that's his mother calling. So,
okay.
So, yeah. So anyway, it's I've enjoyed you know, taking my art to the next level, and it's been kind of fun, and I'm finally getting to the point where I do show things outside the house, and I've been lucky enough to pick up some kudos, you know, here and there, and now. You know, people say, well, how can you get rid of your art? Don't you don't want to keep everything? And I've gotten to the point now where A, there's not enough room in the house. But B, you know, there's nothing more special than having a piece of you out somewhere else that somebody cares enough and appreciates about. Again, I was talking to my artist friend, and I said, you know, this sounds kind of strange, sounds very egotistical, but in a way, it's almost a little piece of immortality in a way, because as long as you may be gone, but as long as some of your artwork is out, somebody's appreciating it somewhere. In a way, a bit of you is living on. So that's kind of an intriguing thing. And I have paintings now in private collections all the way from Nevada and Southern California to Florida and Maine and Texas and everywhere in between. So it's kind of fun to see those things. And every once in a while, people will send a picture of where they've hung the painting. And that's kind of, you know, they tell me the story. I enjoy hearing the backstory. We were talking about that a few minutes ago about the, you know, what do you think of the painting? I enjoy hearing what they're seeing in it, because a lot of times it may have nothing to do with why I painted the painting or what I was really trying to capture in one area. They really like a certain other point that I really hadn't paid that much attention to, but to them, that's really important to them. A good friend of mine commissioned me to do a work on a World War I Jenny, those biplanes that we used in World War I as a trainer. Well, I got the whole painting done, and he liked how it was laying out and everything. And I just said, well, I'm just going to throw a little more detail on the engine up front. And well, I just kind of did that almost as an afterthought. Well, he's come back already. He says, oh, I love the engine. Well, this guy's a motorhead. I mean, he rebuilds cars and this, that, and that. So immediately he glommed onto that. And, you know, that's something that I didn't think about. But I'm really excited that somebody else is excited about a different part of it. That's kind of fun.
Nice. It's like that painting that your parents got in, I think it was Spain, and
Yeah,
then it's in your house now.
yeah.
I wonder how many people have paintings like that or pictures like that in their childhood homes that mean the same type of thing. I can't remember the name of the painting. It's a famous painting. We
Hmm.
had a print of it,
Yep.
and it's an older guy at a table, and he's praying, or it looks like he's praying. He's got a Bible on the table and like a bowl of soup, and
Huh.
he's got a green jacket. I can't remember the name of it, but
Wow.
you'd know it if you saw it. And to us growing up, that was Ben Kenobi
Oh yeah.
eating
Yeah.
soup.
Huh.
And to my mom, it was something else. But the Star Wars time frame, that's who it was to us.
Yeah.
So it's
Well,
interesting to see this.
it just reminded me this fellow that I painted the Jenny for. It's still wet. He hasn't received it yet, but he's looking forward to it. A few years back, he commissioned me to paint another painting of an uncle of his, and talk about having to do some creativity. His uncle was in World War II, was a radio man and waist gunner in a B-24
Wow.
in the South Pacific. Um, and he was the youngest of his siblings. Went over there, was on his first mission at night to a heavily defended Japanese atoll called Tarawa, the Tarawa Atoll. And basically, the ship never returned from the mission.
Hmm.
And so the family, never got to see this guy. He was all of, I think, maybe 19 or 20 at the time. So anyway, flash forward, my friend said, I'd really like to have some kind of a memory of that, of him flying. And he'd done some research and gone up to the different bureaus and found the number of the plane that his uncle was on, found the names of the crew, was talking to a couple authors who had written about those particular battles, and laid all the groundwork. He got all this information. He even had the only picture we had of that particular airplane, um, and it had the nose art on the side of it. So he said, "Can you make a painting of this?" So I had to kind of create my impression of that mission, and he knew from the records he got from the Army Air Corps that it was a B-24 Model D, so it had a certain nose. The models were changing so much in World War II that one might have had a machine gun on the front and one had it on the sides, but anyway, he
Mm-hmm.
wanted to that degree of accuracy. So I got reference photos for B-24Ds that I basically positioned it, painted the background of dusk at Tarawa. And he said, "You got to at least make it look like you shot down one enemy before they were nailed."
Mm.
So I had a picture of the plane is smoking as it's coming around the curve, and it's one engine shot out. But in the back you see another a Japanese Zero going down, but there's two more on his tail and one coming off to the side. All that's completely made up in my head. But
Wow.
he loved that painting. It's still hanging in his house, and he had prints made that up and distributed them to all his other relatives. And um, his aunt was still alive, and actually his great aunt, I guess, was still alive. So she even had a copy of it. So those kind of things, that really have meaning to people, and that kind of combines the creative thing, the aviation love, and the natural beauty too.
Yeah, that sounds like an emotional painting. You got a whole lot of emotions mixed up in that all at once. I can see
Yeah,
looking at
yeah,
that at one time, feeling one way, looking at it another, feeling another. Wow. Wow.
yeah. So that's what keeps me busy. So I'm really having a hoot with it, and I this saying this plein air thing, kind of combining it, because a lot of the stuff like that's you do in the studio. But I decided to try my hand at the plein air. There's this thing called the American Society of Aviation Artists, and they had a plein air workshop up at a place called the Old Rhinebeck Aerodrome, which is up about 2 hours north of New York City, Rhinebeck, New York, along the Hudson River. and they had a couple of their master artists come, and they're going to have a workshop over the weekend. So I flew my plane up there. Another piece of artwork. I kind of built my own airplane, another story, but I flew it up there and got all my painting gear, which I carry in one big backpack. Went up there and painted these old World War One planes. They're all World War One and before. They're all still flyable. So we got in there before the crowds come in every day, and they pulled the plane out and painted a Sopwith Camel, and I painted a German Fokker D8, painted a British Beaufort fighter, and anyway, all these different planes. But again, you had to be quick because you only had that 2-hour block basically to paint 90% of a plane. And I came back and touched them up a little bit here, but that was a great exercise, and it kind of hit several of the cylinders that I like to hit with the aviation and the nature.
When you're getting ready to paint, is there like a process you go through, not just the mindset of thinking about what you're going to do? Maybe call that a little like flying a chair when you're doing the pilot stuff, but is there, like, you stretch before exercise? Is there a type of thing, not maybe a physical stretch, but like a way you get your mind into the ready to paint mindset, or is it you just sit
Yeah, I
down there?
suppose there is actually, and nobody's ever asked that before. Interesting question, and there's many different levels to that, but basically, my preparation routine is I get into comfortable clothes because I'm going to be sitting down for a long time. I try to make sure that I have some music on in the background that's going to be appropriate to what I'm going to be trying to paint. Make sure I have a glass of something nearby I can drink. And then I will be thinking in my head way before I draw anything about what kind of composition I'm looking for, what I want to be the hero of the painting, what I'm going to have as supporting actors. Try to get that down. And then I try to think, well, if I'm going to do that, even when I have the composition down, what color scheme am I going to use? Do I want it to be more of a muted painting on a gray day? What's the weather like? Is it going to be bright and sunny? A lot of high key stuff going on. So I start thinking about my color palette. And I spend actually a fair amount of time doing that because, if you just come throwing every color on the palette, it just becomes too much. So I tend to now try to limit my palette. So I may have 20 different colors out on my palette, but I may actually only use probably about 4 or 5 of them for the vast majority of the painting. In fact, the one I'm doing now of a restaurant down in St. Augustine, I'm using ultramarine blue, I'm using burnt sienna, white, and that is accounting for probably about 90% of the painting. And then I'll throw an occasional yellow or something like that if I want something to pop. But by doing that, by unifying the color scheme, whatever it is you choose, it tends to tie the whole thing together much better, I found. So so to answer your question, I get myself physically comfortable and ready. I actually do some stretching, real life stretching, to try to. In fact, if I'm in the middle of the painting, I step away after a couple hours and go out and stretch outside and come back in. And then I try to prepare in my mind what I'm going to do. And then before I actually set any color down on a canvas, I try to determine, okay, what kind of canvas or what kind of surface do I want this on? Do you want it to be a canvas board, a linen board? Do you want it to be a stretched canvas? Do you want it to be painted on metal? I painted one painting on a big aluminum panel, and the one I'm painting in this restaurant's on copper, the mounted copper panel. And they each have different characteristics. So you have to determine that in advance. What size do you want it? What format? Do you want a square format? Do you want it long? Do you want it really long versus height? And so you think about all that. So all that's part of the preparation. And then I will actually get a sketchbook out, and I'll just do little thumbnail sketches, only about 3 by 4 inches. And I'll just try different things to make sure everything's fitting where I want it to fit. And double check the size ratio, length to width, and see if that is what I really want to accomplish. So I do all that, and it sounds like it takes a long time. It really doesn't. I mean, in about 20 minutes, you can do all that stuff and get ready, and then you set up and go. And I try to make sure I'm going to have a block of time of at least 2 hours, or I'm not going to be interrupted.
When you're done with a session of painting, do you have a way that you kind of come back to the real world after that, or is it just brushes down, you clean up, and you're done?
Most of the time, it's the latter. I put it down, although I put it down with the promise to myself that a painting is never really done. So I will always reserve the right to go back and check it again. In the old days, the masters used to look in a mirror. They think they had something set up, and then they would look at it reverse in a mirror, and they could find things they didn't notice before. I'm too lazy to get a big old mirror like that. It's not that easy to find a big mirror like that anymore. But I found just taking your cell phone. So when I think I'm pretty much comfortable with what I'm going to do on the painting for today, I'll snap a quick picture of it on the phone, and then I'll go in and I'll watch the news or something, or I'll watch a show on TV. And then I will, after about an hour, I'll pull up the picture. And it is absolutely amazing what you can see in those pictures that you couldn't see. Like, your mind is too focused into one thing. You can't step away far enough. But I would say that when I think a painting is really done and I start looking at the photo, there's probably 15 more iterations of that painting before I ever put varnish on it and frame it. And that can be any particular size, because there's always something you'll miss or something you can tweak a little bit better. I went to an art show one time with the Jacksonville Artists Guild, and they had a pretty well-known seascape painter in there. And somebody asked him at the end of his talk, they said, well, when do you know when a painting is finished? And he laughed, he chuckled, he said, a painting is never finished. Basically, it's done when you give up with battle fatigue. But that's it. So you can always find something. The famous story of the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci dragged that thing around with him for like 10 or 15 years. It was at his foot of his bed when he died. He kept changing things all the time with that painting. He was never completely finished with it. And there were a couple of the French Impressionists who were notorious for that. Even if they sold a painting, they were known to break into somebody's house because they realized they'd screwed something up, like a year later, and wanted to get the painting out and doctor it up and then put it back.
Yeah. Goodness.
So, yeah. So that's what I do. I basically have a preliminary, it's looking good. I never say something's done now, but I'll put everything down, go in, get away from it, and then go back and readdress things. And a lot of times I'll have, there'll be some problem in the painting. I'm not quite sure what it is, but there's something I don't like, but it'll come to me like at 3:00 in the morning. I'll wake up to, aha. And usually when I think of it, I'll come up with a solution as well. So it's not uncommon at all for Sue to find me out in the art studio at 3:30 in the morning, trying to solve a problem on one of the paintings I was working on.
Yeah. And it's interesting how much painting and poetry seem to be alike. I'm not much of a painter. I do some poetry and then just regular writing, but it's interesting. A lot of things to think about, to cogitate on some items.
Yeah. And then when I really want to get away from it all, I go flying. So after my military career, I decided I want to have my own airplane, and I was not satisfied with some of the planes like the Cessnas and Pipers I'd flown before. So I actually ended up building a plane called a Lancier, which is basically the biggest, baddest model airplane you've ever seen. And it's a kit. It took me about 5 years to build it. And in fact, your viewers can Google it if they want. It's the aircraft tail number is November. That's N654DM, 654 Delta Mike. And I guess it's been in the air 26 years now. And I guess through the years, people have taken photos of it and they've recorded things about it. And so people can look it up if they like it. It took me 5 years to build it. I decided I'd put it on the air show circuit for 1 year after I built it. We entered it in 5 shows and we're lucky enough to walk away with 5 awards. So
Wow.
now I don't enter it in air shows for judging anymore. I just tired of polishing the plane, so I let other people do that now. But but it's still a lot of fun. So if I have a particularly stressful day or something, I'll go out and I'll just fly around for about an hour, and it's like Zen. I mean, everything else falls away, all your other problems, and just because air traffic control doesn't care who you are. When you're in that plane, you're the pilot of November 654 Delta Mike. And I've talked to other people, and they have the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're, a nobody like me, or if you're like a John Travolta or, Harrison Ford. Any of these people, they all say that when they get in that plane, all the cares of the world, all the fame, and all the other stuff fall away, and you're just trying to be good at what you're doing and being in the moment. So that's very therapeutic for me too. So I do flying. I try to fly at least once a week.
I found with flying, and I don't have anywhere near the amount of experiences you have, but my big thing when I started it, I was like, man, this is going to change everything. This is going to change life, just getting places. And it's definitely one of the most expensive hobbies, but I always wondered why people didn't do it more. Like, how come you get your driver's license and think of how much freedom you got from getting your driver's license, that getting a pilot's license is similar to that. And then when you get up there and you're by yourself, you're like, oh, okay, this is why people don't do it. Because if you don't do something, you're going to die. You don't get put into that situation very often in regular life. Like a car, you can pull over and you can just say, okay, that's it. I'm not but you've got a lot to do before you're not in peril of death. So that's,
well, they say that takeoffs are optional, landings are mandatory.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I just always thought the opposite of that. I always figure I'm much safer in the air than I am on the ground.
Wow.
I think on a highway, there's so many people that don't know how to drive. They're out there trying to kill you every day, or at least up here, it's the, big space around you, and heaven forbid something goes wrong with the airplane. Most planes are pretty good at gliding in. Now,
I don't have enough hours in the air yet to be able to think like that.
Yeah.
But it's,
people get themselves in situations. They get in weather they shouldn't be in, or, they try to press it. They're not feeling well, and they decide to go flying anywhere. They get home-itis. I've got to be there, so they try to press in situations they shouldn't be flying. But if you just fly recreationally, to me it's been very Zen-like. But again, you have to be prepared, and it's funny you're talking about getting your driver's license. In a lot of states, you can get your pilot's license before you can get your driver's license.
Going through flight school made me better at observing things, because you're up there and you're looking for, is that a plane out there, or is that something over there? Exactly. So I was much more aware. I think it made me a better driver on the road too, just because I was, I guess, thinking in that third dimension a little bit more than normal. And
well, plus I think having flown, you realize you're not just looking at the car in front of you. You're trying to see what's the car 5 cars up doing, because you're always trying to think out further.
One of the best driving advices I had when I was younger, going through driving school for getting a ticket, was looking 11 seconds down the road, and just having that exercise of saying, all right, that sign is 11 seconds down the road at this current speed. You're getting used to being able to tell how far ahead that is. And of course it's different speeds, different visibility, but that transferred a lot over well into flying. And then with policing, where you're driving faster than normal. I mean, that's one of the best parts about policing, but things look different when you're going 120, 130 than they do when you're just going the speed limit. Then when you get down to 55, 65, you're like, man, this is kind of boring, but it does it makes you a better driver. Bad things can still happen when you're going slow, but you do understand a lot better when you're working a motorcycle crash and the person goes, well, I was coming around this turn and then I just, for whatever reason, I fell off. And I was like, oh, I think I know why you fell off, because you're going 120. It's at night. You're not used to it. And that shadow across the road looked like there was something in the road. And then you tried to dodge it and you realize it was just the shadow of a light pole. Because if you haven't been in that situation yourself, driving, as fast as you can, then you go, oh, okay, it gives you a little more insight. And then just the flying stuff, is so much better.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot better than driving, but
it's funny you mentioned the driving. After flying, I have to really watch myself, because my landing speed is about 100 knots, which is about 120 miles an hour. So that's as slow as I get when I'm flying, is when I come in to land. So then I get in the car to go home, and I looked at this. Well, I won't tell you about fast, but I looked at. I'm not up at those speeds, but I'm certainly not going 55 coming around the highway. I think, whoa, I got to back off here a minute, because that sight picture of things going by is still like you're in the airplane, and you just adapt to that. Yeah, that's interesting. I talking about lessons learned, I had the opportunity to get my driver's license in New York in 11th grade, and which was a real ordeal, because they never pass anybody the first time taking a driver's test in New York. Anyway, got my license, real proud of myself. We were transferred to Southern California up in the high desert for my senior year of high school. My dad was stationed at George Air Force Base out there. But I was a rising senior, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to have my California driver's license? I could have just kept my New York one, because I was only going to be there a year before I went to college. But I said, no, I want to be one of the cool kids, Beach Boys and all that. So I went into here I'd driven the car all the way across country. I go into the California DMV, and they said, well, you're not 18 yet. I said, well, no, I'm not, but I've got my license here. I've been driving for a year. And they said, well, not in California, you're not. And they took away my New York license and wouldn't let me. They gave me a learner's permit until I did a driver's ed class. And I was fit to be tied. I said, it just took away. And you can imagine a 17-year-old taking away your driving privilege. That was awful.
Yeah, that's terrible.
So, but anyway, I've got to say, California at the time was tremendous in terms of the driving school they taught the kids. There's still some of the rules they use, and I never learned them in New York or anywhere else, that have really helped me out. They had this thing called the safe lane concept, because out there, this is back in the 70s, but still a lot of the roads were 3 lanes in either direction, that kind of thing. And they basically said, look, this is like fluid mechanics. I said, if you're going down the road, you got 3 lanes, you want to be in the middle lane, because that's where there's the least resistance. You don't have to worry about people coming on and leaving in the right. You have to worry about the people zooming by you, trying to get by you on the left. So the safe lane is usually the middle lane. So it's funny that stuck, that one course, and I still drive by that today. And other little things that they say, well, you come up to a place where you're going to turn left. And I hate turning left, but you're going to turn left across traffic, and you're sitting there in the lane waiting for the other oncoming traffic to clear. Never, ever turn your wheel to make that left turn until you're getting ready to actually turn, because you may be sitting there with your brake on. If some guy comes in rear ends and you've already got your wheel turned, he may push you right out to that oncoming traffic. And I've never forgotten that demonstration they showed in that class. And to this day, I teach my kids the California driving school method of avoiding accidents and things. But it's just funny what you remember. I'm sure, a lot of the flying, whether you like flying, a lot of times has to do with your instructor, what nuggets you picked up from them.
Yeah. Another good driving rule I learned from policing, just from working a couple head-on crashes, where at night, especially if you can avoid being in the left lane, that's the best, because if somebody's going the wrong way, that's their slow lane. So,
interesting.
That's a good rule.
Yeah. Well, I've always been The other thing I learned, not so much there, but just as I've gotten older, is nothing goes on good between midnight and 6 a.m. So I try not to be driving too late at night. So,
Yeah, that's where I learned my theories of policing, which are you need to be nosy, look for trouble, and solve problems. That's all policing is. So you get a lot of people that, when you're stopping people and they don't want to talk to you, you have to build up some sort of internal fortitude as to dealing with that all the time. So maybe that's why I like the idea of podcasts now, because it's just regular conversations. It's not, it's an agreed upon conversation. It's not we're going to have a conversation because you're doing something wrong and now I'm going to talk to you. It's
right.
different type of meeting people.
It's got to be tough being in law enforcement these days. I think that's a whole nother topic we can get into.
Yeah.
I have some law enforcement in my family. My grandfather was a New York City cop back in the early 1900s. In fact, only about 6 years before he was a policeman is when all the different boroughs decided to merge together and have the NYPD. Before that, Queens had its own department, Manhattan had its own department, etc. But he was in some exciting times back in the gangster days, and I was the only guy in my family interested in family history. So when he died, they sent me the contents of the footlocker that was at the bottom of his bed, and all these police files from New York City. I'm not sure you're supposed to have them or not. Mugshots of all kinds of strange things, and he was involved in the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, and he was the guy that reported the Hindenburg disaster from Lakehurst. I got the police plotter from that day. Detective Johnson calls in from Lakehurst, send ambulances, Hindenburg has crashed. And all that, and you kind of wonder, what was an NYPD cop doing in Lakehurst, New Jersey at the Hindenburg? And then you start getting into the NYPD at that time had an international squad, which I guess was one of the precursors of Interpol, because he was constantly traveling back and forth to Europe and doing all kinds of stuff. But I found some news articles, and boy, talk about shoot 'em up, bang bang stuff. I mean, there was some robbery suspects they were pursuing in some park. It wasn't Central Park, it was another park in Manhattan. And they were shooting back and forth at each other. Shot, but his gun jammed, so he fell down and rolled into the lake, pretending to be dead while he's trying to clear his gun underwater. Then popped back up and got the guy. It's like, holy moly! I guess it's been crazy for a long time, but it's a different kind of crazy today.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I've enjoyed our conversation today. Perhaps when you get your 3-part latex painting shown somewhere, let me know. I'll definitely go look at that. And
great.
Maybe in the future we can have another conversation, whether it's on here or, just in person.
Sure.
Tennis and such.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. All right. I'll talk to you on the other side of this.
Close it up. It's great to see you.